same time, this beautifully, elegantly composed film gives us immediately the constellations of art. So we're thinking of the social history, but at the same time, here's the history of cinema, sort of another chapter added to it. Sort of wonderful to sort of keep in mind that this is an art form, not just an art. But you can thank the Baldwin estate, and it could be a sort of difficult process working with an estate. Tell us first Baldwin's importance to you, sort of as you were coming up, why this novel of all his work.
Yeah, as a young person, I kind of stumbled onto the work of James Baldwin through Giovanni's Room and The Fire Next Time, and just always really admired the way he expressed himself and the things he chose to express. But I hadn't read If Beale Street Could Talk, and a friend of mine who's in the special things, a woman named Julia Sherrar, who works in sound and film, she sent me the book in 2010 and said, "Have you read Beale Street? And if you haven't, I think you should, because I think there's a wonderful film in it, and I think you're the perfect person to make it." That was before Moonlight or any of those things. And so every filmmaker knows. People will tell you, "Oh, I read this thing in Time Magazine," or "I was in the grocery store and I overheard this conversation." It usually goes in one ear and out the other, but because it was Julia, I took it seriously. And when I read the book, what I was fascinated by was the way it blended the two voices of Baldwin, both the very sensual James Baldwin, who wrote about romance and interpersonal relationships, and love, to be honest. And then this other James Baldwin who wrote very bitterly in this book, very angrily, these searing social critiques. And in particular, the ways in which the American government, American society, the role those things played in the lives of black folks. And it was just really fused, I felt like, in this family, in the story of Tish and Fonnie, in a really organic way that was extremely challenging, I'll say. But I felt like if we could pull it off, it'd be also quite rewarding. And so, without having the rights to the damn novel, I went over to Europe and adapted it.
You started working on it with no certainty that you would.
It didn't even occur to me to reach out to the James Baldwin estate, which is weird because I had an agent
Very
at the time.
encouraging.
That's very stupid, man. So yeah, I just went to Europe and wrote the adaptation, and then came back and realized, oh, and now I think that turned out pretty well. I think I should try to do something with this. And so I went about trying to figure out how to get in touch with the James Baldwin estate. And a professor at University of Georgia named Ed Pavlich, who also sometimes teaches at Yale. The Yale Princeton Harvard, they all blend to me. No shade to anybody who went to Yale Princeton Harvard. But he had seen my first film, Medicine for Melancholy. And so he said, "Oh, I know someone at the estate. I'll give you an address. So just so you know, like, buckle up. It's going to take a while." And that was 5 years ago.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been some longer stories, but it sounded like...
This is true. I mean, I'm a privileged ass person. From this trip in 2013, I got a best picture in this
5
film.
years
So.
in the life of someone your age is a long time.
Oh, thank you very much for that.
But it sounds as though you wrote the adaptation rather quickly.
This is just the most productive 6 weeks of my life, looking back on it. Maybe there'll be another 6 weeks going forward that are even more productive, but I was just at a point. I'd made Medicine in 2008, and 5 years had passed, not much had happened, and one of the producers on this film, Adela Romansky, who's also the producer on Moonlight, she just called me up in the summer of 2012 and said, "What the hell is going on? You've got to make a film." And she had been working on some things with people she didn't know. I've been working on things with people I didn't know. She said, "Well, let's kind of link up and let's figure out something to work on together." She said, "I want to work on things. I want to work on stories I want to work on stories with people I love that are about things they care about." And that was the whole mission statement. And then a year later, she arranged for me to go to Brussels, Belgium, of all places. And on this 6-week trip, I wrote the first draft of Moonlight and the first draft of Beale Street. Both. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But
The force was with you.
the force was with me, man, but I was also lonely. I had no friends. I had no cell phone. I knew no one. It was total immersion and isolation.
Well, Baldwin would strike me as a very hard writer to adapt, simply because, in addition to the large panorama that he evokes, the city, it's also very kind of interior. But watching this film, we kind of don't miss that interiority, or we feel it's sort of there somehow. Do you think that, in a way, your attraction to Baldwin and your sort of ability to get what he's doing, as well as just the adaptation of Moonlight, comes from, say, your early ambition to be a writer yourself?
Yeah, actually, at Florida State, I have 2 bachelor's degrees, not from Yale, Princeton, or Harvard, but I have 2 bachelor's degrees from Florida State, and one is in creative writing, and the other is in film. I was pursuing a creative writing degree when I discovered there was a film school at Florida State. And so, yeah, I started off in writing workshops, and then when I discovered there was a film school, I wanted to switch to cinema, but I had accrued so many credits that I just finished them both. And so, yeah, I used to want to be a writer, writing literature, literary things. And unfortunately, it's made the way I write screenplays. I'm always trying to force the interior voice into my screenplays, for better or worse. But what I think what happened is I'm still trying to carry that interiority somehow onto the screen. And Mr. Baldwin's stock in trade, his true gift was getting at the interior lives of characters, and then in that way getting at the interior workings of all these societal dynamics that all of us participate in without knowing. And so I think translating this text to the screen, it was really about trying to find the most succinct ways with sound and image to translate the interior lives of these characters. And there's a few places where it really just comes together. And you were talking about the adaptation. I think part of it was I was so obsessed with the book that by the time I sat down to actually adapt it, it kind of just poured out of me. But really, it was also, there were so many places where I could find really simple visual ideas that could translate pages of text. For example, there's this whole sequence that maybe goes on too long, I don't think so, but when Stephan James's Fonny is working this wood very late in the film, and the camera's going around him at 360 degrees, that's 3 lines of text in the book. Tish is remembering Fonny, and she just says, Fonny is working on the wood. It is a very soft wood. He doesn't want to defile the wood. And just reading the novel, it just appeared to me as him seeing himself in this space where there should not be light, and yet we took the roof off the set. This is something that, with James Laxton, the cinematographer, Adela, the producer, Jeremy and Dee Dee, talking to me very early, because I knew we had to build that set on the stage, but I said, and it's an odd thing to say, I know Mark wants to build it all like to code because it's got to feel real, but there's going to be a point where I want to take the roof off the entire set, and I want to blast a 20K light right down onto the sculpture, because when I read the book, I saw that in my head. And so there was this lovely, almost game, so to speak, of the writer in me and the director in me, then having this conversation with the producer in me, and how can we all link up and figure out how to take this very dense interior text and translate it into very simple sounds and images. The other place is when Regina King is sharing It's to Puerto Rico. That's like a whole 20-page passage in the book. But in the movie, when she arrives in Puerto Rico, she doesn't say a single damn word until Pedro Pascal sits down as Pedrocito. And so again, you're taking all this interior life, and you have this amazing actress, and she's just looking at you guys, putting the wig on, taking the wig off, like vulnerability, indecision, the burden of these black women carrying or shouldering the burden of these families for generations. And now it's like, what do I do with this? And why should I have to be the one to carry all this weight? So it was like a really lovely game of trying to find as many ways as possible to really boil down the text to its essence, and then give it to the actors in a way that they could translate it to you guys.
Well, she says a lot in what she does.
Exactly.
It's very strange that the city seems so naturally evoked, and yet you say that you're kind of building sets or constructing this place. What about the actual kind of production? Did you work with a large crew? Did the shoot take a long time?
I mean, my first film cost $12,000. My second film cost 1.5. So to me, hell yeah, it was a very large crew. But for Jeremy and Dee Dee, it wasn't like a super large crew. They done World War Z. So, for me, it's always about trying to keep the energy of making that $12,000 film with 5 people, no matter how large we scale up the production. I think in that way, the actors always have the freedom that if they want to walk left when the scene's meant to go right, hell yeah, walk left, you know, and James and I will follow you. So it's always about trying to build the production footprint in the way that we can have total freedom. The actors can have total freedom. There's a scene in this movie where there's like 8 people sitting in a living room. And if you know anything about my work, this is the first time there's ever been a scene in anything I've ever done where there's more than 2 people sitting across the table having a conversation. So it was like, how the hell do we do this, but also make it feel like 2 people sitting across the table having a conversation? But I also wanted it to feel real. We didn't have the budget to recreate Harlem as it existed in 1974. You know, the city of New York loved New York. However, in the early 1970s, y'all did not go up to Harlem and pick up people's trash. And we couldn't like just recreate like Harlem as it was in 1974. And so for us, it was about the interiors and it was about this landscape of faces. That was how we were going to build the city. It was how we were going to build the period dynamic. And so Mark Friedberg, our production designer, was just running around doing everything he could to find interiors that would be as authentic as the period photography. That was most of our research, Roy Decarava and Gordon Parks from the period. And so, man, Mark, have any of y'all worked with Mark Friedberg? He's a smart ass dude. And so what he did was he went to Harlem, he and Samson Jacobson, our location scout, and they were trying to find people who were flipping these brownstones in Harlem. And they found a dude flipping a brownstone in Harlem and said, bruh, wait, we will demo it for you. However, before we demo it, we're gonna build it into a film set. We're gonna make it like the early 1970s. And then when we're done, you will finish demoing it, and you can tell people they made a James Baldwin movie in this brownstone. And he went for it. And so what you're watching in the first act of the film is an actual brownstone on Edgecombe, you know, that has always been there. And the family was on the 2nd story, the actors were on the 3rd story, production was on the 1st story. But it was their house. And then, just like with Moonlight, we tried to game it a little bit. We filmed everything with the Rivers family up until a certain point. And then Ingenue, Michael Beach, Dominique, and Ebony, they walk in. And it was clear they were walking into Kiki's house. And they got to respect that house. And it created this tension that was so lovely that by the time Regina kicks everybody out the door, it's like, oh shit, it's about to pop off. I mean, I hope y'all are laughing and stuff. It's meant to be funny.
It's very ironic that the city's so lovingly evoked and downtown is their paradise. And Baldwin himself had such a sort of bad time in Greenwich Village in his time, so you know, it kind of gives him something back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, you know, when you're adapting someone who you admire and revere the way I admire and revere Mr. Baldwin, it's interesting the process you have to go through to get to the point where you can take authorship of the piece. I think the book is written from Baldwin's perspective. It just is. I mean, it's told through Tish, but it's Baldwin's perspective. The film is not made from Mr. Baldwin's point of view. It's made from Tish's point of view. Yeah. And whenever she's having these thoughts of these times with Fonnie, and in particular, like watching the chemistry between her and Stefan, those memories are almost hopeful. You know, this is the way we wish it could be. If our lives could exist in a vacuum, these 2 characters, if they never encountered this cop, they would just always walk hand in hand. The light would always be bright, the colors would always be saturated. And so we sort of leaned into that. And I think it is a slight divergence from the book. But I hope that if he sat down and saw the film, there are moments too where we do lean back into his perspective, such as when Stefan James and Brian Tyree Henry are in this 12-minute scene that is peak Baldwin. That has nothing to do with Tish's perspective, that is peak Baldwin. And so I think there's a give and take between her perspective, his perspective, and also too the nature of adaptation. At some point, the literature has to end and the cinema has to begin.
Yes. And also in the book, you know, Tish after a while begins to sound like Baldwin herself.
It's, you know, I mean, he's an amazing writer. I mean, one of those, he slipped. Yeah, a few times he slipped. It's like, Tish don't know that.
He got so annoyed.
There's no way Tish know that.
That she was talking in like parenthetical expressions.
Yes. But you know what, hey, all to the good.
But then these black and white photographic insertions, I think, cover the history or bring the history up very well. It's a film that tells us how much we already know about this story and this situation, even though in some ways this is the beginning of Black Lives Matter. But for a film that sort of has this rather dour subject, and they don't succeed really in getting him out, and there is this humiliation to plea deal. That somehow it never loses its kind of affirmative or, I don't want to say positive because the word is sort of something, but there's something kind of life-affirming about it. Maybe because it's a love story, really. That in that way, that they're sort of not defeated. So again, watching the film, I have to say, you photograph Black people so beautifully. It says how near we still are to those times when that wasn't the case, that we sort of notice it now. But you could just sort of walk behind them the whole time. It's really
I've been working.
The music is, of course, out.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been working with James Laxton, the cinematographer, since film school. And when we first started making films, we did everything on emotion. We started film school like around 1999, 2000. We shot everything on 16 millimeter. And very quickly, I realized that we had to do some very aggressive things to the image in order for it to photograph the Black actors the same as it was photographing the white actors. And then being a student doing research, I realized that the history of actual emotion is rooted in trying to sell suburban white families, 35 millimeter Instamatic cameras. And those things were calibrated to replicate white skin and not necessarily dark skin. Now, moving 15, 16 years forward, James is just, he has developed this muscle because he knows, that Black people are beautiful. It's not that he's photographing them beautifully. Black people are beautiful, and so just photograph them as they are. And that's pretty much all we ever set out to do. Nicholas Patel did the score on this, and man, I love Nick because Nick just gets down, man. And it's one of those things where somebody was talking about the music in the film, and they said, oh, what I love about the score is that the movie couldn't exist without it. But it's actually, that relationship is in the inverse. I think Nick is very cautious about trying to force his music on the film. Instead, what we do is we watch the actors, we watch the scenes, and the movie tells us what the music needs to sound like. I think both this film and the previous film are, everything about it, I hope aesthetically, both the cinematography, the score, the soundscape, is meant to reflect the consciousness of the main character. And so this movie sounds the way Tish feels, it sounds the way Fonnie feels, and Nick is just really adept at adjusting to what the movie is telling him, as opposed to being a guy who's trained at Juilliard, and just forcing things onto the lives and souls of these characters.
Yeah. This is a film with this American subject, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like a film that's confined by American.
So I had a screening in Rome, and I don't know if there's any Italians out here, but I had no idea how much Italian families and Black families have in common, because holy shit, I thought I was at the Apollo. It was insane. It was insane. But I think also too, it's also just like, people know what it's like to be in love. People know what it's like to have the man put his foot on your neck, I think there's certain elements of the story, I think they're universal, they're very specific in a certain way, but I think we all understand what it's like to have our direct access to our humanity denied us. And I think in a certain way, that feeling, both the abundance, the absence of love, the connection to family, having those things threatened unnecessarily, is something that kind of unites us and joins us in a certain way. But yeah, screening this movie in Rome was crazy. Crazy.
Especially the political climate at the moment.
I mean, man, I was shocked. But in a good way,
That's good, though. They need to see it. Okay. So I think that perhaps we'll turn it over to some Q&A while he's here. Ask away, young man.
It's been 30 years since I read the novel, and I'm interested to hear anything that you might have changed from the text. Specifically, my memory is that the novel ends before there's a verdict. Am I misremembering, or did you change that?
You have a very good memory, my friend. So it was, most of the changes I made were small, and they were just in the process of production, What I love about working with Jeremy and Adela and Dee and Sarah is they understand that I'm kind of a termite. And so we'll go to Location Scout, and we're meant to be looking over here, and Barry Jenkins is looking over there. And the opening of the film happened that way. The opening of the book does not open the way the film opens. The book opens in the first prison visit, but it was really important to me to establish the character's humanity. Tish and Fonnie are soulmates, and over the course of 20 hours reading the book, you understand that. In 2 hours of watching the film, you have to get that immediately. So I was trying to find a way to establish circumstances of their relationship, of their humanity, before introducing the audience to the circumstances of their scenario. And so we were scouting for the sequence where the dads are hustling to sort of like make money to bail Fonny out, which, by the way, is two black men now committing a crime to save the son who's committed no crime. That's America in a nutshell. But we're scouting for that. And I just looked over, and we were at, I'm not a New Yorker, but Riverside Park with that lovely walkway.
Yeah.
So I just started walking up the damn steps. And as we were walking up the steps, I saw the trees, and I saw them walking with these inverted colors, and I was like, yo, can we do this? It was like 8 days before production started. And they were like, yeah, we could do that somehow. And so we did it. So a lot of the changes were like that. The loft where Levy takes them to view the apartment. That character appears in the novel, and it's so strange because the novel is so bitter. And then this landlord shows up, this Jewish landlord, and just treats them just so lovingly, so humanely, as it should be. So I was trying to find a way, this building can't exist, it doesn't make any sense to me, but we found this building, and when we got there was this Jewish landlord wearing like socks and sandals, and I thought Dave Franco was going to play this guy. I'm going to model him after this guy showing us the space. But even more than that, I was standing in the space, and it occurred to me, I was like, this is impossible, and what shows love and faith in love and the power of love, and someone showing you something right in front of your face that is impossible, and you going, yes, I believe you. And so we changed that scene in the book, and now it's this way in the film. The change you're talking about came about, this is the most difficult change I had to make. I don't know if any of you have read the book, clearly you have, but I was just, the way, the performance Stephan James gives in that last scene, the last prison visit, as we were cutting the film, the more people we asked, the more they felt like he left her, he went back, and he hung himself. And then in the book, the very next scene, Tish comes home, there's this phone call, and she learns that Frank, Michael Beach, Fonny's dad, has also killed himself. And then the baby is born, and the book ends. But for me, it was just like death on death on death, and I just didn't want to kill all these black patriarchs. And I also felt like, the point of what Mr. Baldwin was doing was that family, community, joy, love, these are things that sustain black life. And so I wanted to make sure that nobody walked out of the theater doubting that the child is born, the child is healthy, and the family is intact. And so the biggest departure from the book is that, we extended the ending and just confirmed that the family unit is intact. So it wasn't an easy choice to make, but it was one that I felt I had to do.
I see a hand there. Sorry about
You touched on the score and the soundtrack, which was so compelling. And I noticed that the theme comes back, but in such different tones depending on the context. Also, whenever it was on the record player, Miles Davis, for example, volume stayed so loud and was also competing with the dialogue. And I was wondering what you and Nick were trying to accomplish with that.
It depends on which version of that scene you're talking about. I thought you were going to go to a different place. To us, the score is always a tool. What I like about cinema and what we're becoming capable of doing now. I'm looking at the room here. I like the orientation of these speakers, actually. When you read a novel, it's a very active experience. Everything you're doing is in your head. A character speaks, you hear it in your head. A character smells, you hear it in your head. Every element of your senses are activated in a certain way. And an auditorium is very passive. You guys sit there and you just watch. But what I like to think of is that the room itself is the brain now. And so I'm going to treat this like you guys are reading a novel. I want to activate everything. So sometimes there's an abundance of sound, sometimes there's an absence of sound. So you mentioned the themes coming back but being altered. Yes, because the first time Tish and Fonny make love is a song called Eros. It's this beautiful, lush piece of music. You guys are probably like, why is there no edit? They're just sitting down, they're making out, all this shit. Later, when Brian Tyree Henry shows up and he and Stephan James are in this very long scene, this 12-minute sequence, which to me is this thing that black men do. You see another black man in the street, hey, what's up, bro, how you doing? I'm good. Then if the conversation goes on for an hour, you have a smoke, you have a beer, I'm good, and you keep going. 2 hours later, I'm good, but. And then finally, 4 hours in, actually, I'm not that good. So the sequence between Brian and Stephan is about that.
And eventually, in the middle of that scene, you're right, the Miles Davis starts playing, Blue and Green. Blue and Green is playing, and it's kind of loud, but over the course of the scene, it starts to ebb out a little bit. And then this rumble starts to appear. That rumble is the same song that plays when Tish and Fonnie first make love. The same melody, but now this thing is a symbol of joy and hope and birth. Nick and I have decided it's now corrupted by the experience that Daniel, Brian Tyree Henry's experienced in prison, and that Fonnie is potentially going to befall himself. Now, at first we turned off the Miles Davis Blue and Green, the needle drop, because you introduce score, needle drop goes out. But instead, the smoke is swirling, the two men's spirits are blending. And so instead of like cutting between Brian and Stefan, we took one of the cameras out, it's 2-camera shoot. We put the camera on a slider, started panning back and forth. So now the energy goes from Brian to Stefan, Brian to Stefan. And as we're panning, Miles Davis Blue and Green is going from here to here to here, because now you're reading the novel, you're in the brain, and everything they're hearing, you're hearing it the same way. So it's a little bit maybe too much at times, but I feel like well, I'm just saying, it can't be.
No, keep apologizing for his
it can't be.
facts.
But I think that the whole point is, if you're gonna walk a mile in somebody's shoes, then walk all the damn way. And so if the smoke is swirling around them, it's gonna swirl around you. Yeah, that's what it
The
is.
smoke in that scene where he's working on his wood is incredible.
So this guy, his head shot up. Let's get homeboy right here.
And
Yeah.
there's someone very far back. So
One of the critics mentioned that.
One of the who? See, they'll tell you. I told them not to send me that stuff, bro. So was it a good one?
Good, yeah.
All right, cool, all right.
Well, this one quote was, you said one could teach a year course in your use of color in this film. So I'd like to know whether you thought of color symbolically or was it instinctual?
It wasn't symbolically, but it wasn't instinctual either. Mark Freeberg, I'd love to shout him out. He's basically the only department head who was based in New York, born and raised in New York. He was kind of like our guru. He's like the Gandalf with the staff, walking us through production. And in pre-pro, he would have these salons at his house in Fort Greene, and we would just sit in his living room, we would drink wine and like wine and cheese and crackers and all this stuff. And it'd be myself, him, Carolyn Estlin, costume designer, and James Laxon, the cinematographer. We would just pass like reference photos. We would pass color swatches around. And eventually what we realized was we were searching for an organizing principle, but that was eluding us. But what was happening was we all kept coming back to what is Tish feeling? And what we kind of coalesced around was this idea that the film is this journey through purgatory. You know, Fonnie's awaiting trial. Tish is bringing this child to term. And so whenever she's thinking of these other thoughts, when she and Fonnie, the good times, walking at the park, the first date, first time they make love, those things do not have a fidelity to reality. Those things are coming through memory. And that memory is the greatest memory ever, the greatest smell ever, the greatest touch ever. And the color of those things just revealed itself to be very vibrant, very saturated. And so if there was a color schematic at all, it was just, when is Tish allowing herself to feel joy, and when is she not? And that was really the only organizing color principle in the film.
And then that hand way in the back.
Thanks. Love the film. Just one observation and a quick question. First, I love the use of the Bowery train station, the Bowery J. It's the only place that looks like Hell there's really doing. And then second, there were so many scenes of the actors looking right down the barrel, looking right at us. Especially when they were talking in the scenes of them being either in prison or when Mom first got to Puerto Rico, or when she's putting on her wig, or just so many times that they're looking right down the lens. Talk about that choice and how you felt that allowed your actors to really kind of look into it.
Yeah, I'll repeat it. The first question was about the Bowery train station,
It was an observation about that.
Yeah, but you are a very astute New Yorker, because nobody's ever called out what that station actually is. But and it's a bad thing too, because it's meant to be uptown, but it's the one station we could get.
135th.
Yeah, we put it up there, but he knows exactly what it is. But it was it was kind of dope to have a working train station. We actually had one stop we could go uninterrupted. We had a real car. All the graffiti is visual effects, but I'll tell a quick story about that. So we got the station, day one of production, meant to be super simple. And this is why I love my producers, because of course during the day I'm looking around, I'm like, what train station has bars at the end of the platform? The Bowery train station, apparently. And so I said to Stefan, I was like, bruh, can you run down those stairs and just grab that bar and just like start yelling. He's like, yeah, I can. What am I going to say? I was like, get me out of here, baby. And so we backed the train up, not playing at all. It's the end of day one, and I said, put the dolly on track, and I just want to just push it right towards the damn bar. And Stefan's going to run down, and somehow we got it. Somehow we got it. Shout out to the MTA because they were so dope. They're like, what the hell is this guy doing? I was like, I don't know, but it's gonna work. And now it's in like every version of the trailer. I mean, you can't escape that shot. The direct-to-camera stuff is, again, it goes back to Homegirl's question about trying to make the cinema a place of active empathy as opposed to passive empathy. I feel like when you're sitting in a movie, you're often watching the camera, watch the actors, but you're not actually looking directly at them. You're not watching them. You know, the camera's always like here, here, sometimes it's like here, but it's never really here. And so who the hell are they looking at? But I feel like there are certain moments where it is time for the audience to directly access the emotion of the characters. In this film, nobody's ever talking when those moments arise, because I can't tell the actors when we're gonna plan to do them. It's the most artificial thing an actor can do. Kiki Lane, who plays Tish in this film, is her first screen role ever. She described it. She's so dope. And she said to me, the first time because I always spring it on them. I don't know when it's going to happen. You know, I tell James, he brings the rig up, it's the 50 millimeter, because Claire and he said the 50 millimeter is the truest lens in cinema. And so we always put the 50 on and say, hey, look directly in the camera. But for me, what it does is sometimes the distance between the actor and the character disappears. And at that point, you're getting just being. And when I see just being on set, I want to give that just being to you guys, because acting is giving and receiving. When you're acting with the camera, you're giving to the camera and nobody's receiving it unless it's coming directly to you. And then you receive it and you give something back to the room, to your partner, to whoever. It's like active empathy. And so throughout production, there were a few moments where we decided to do these things. And as I was saying earlier, I'm just always trying to find a way to place you in the body, in the soul of the piece of work. And between Moonlight and this film, this has become the device that does it most succinctly. There was an article written about myself in the film by Angela Flournoy in the New York Times a couple months ago. And she made the most astute observation ever, because most of the shit I do, like the really random formal things, I don't have an intellectual idea behind them. It's all coming from the gut. But Angela said, you know, this is a very diverse audience in here, actually. She said, if you're a white audience member and you're sitting in the room and you see these moments of repose, these moments where these black characters are just deep in their feeling and they're looking directly at you, it might be the first time you have ever looked a black person in the eye, thusly for a sustained period of eye contact. And it's like, that never occurred to me. And then she said, and if you were a black person, in that moment you were seeing your brother, your sister, your father, your mother, your uncle, your cousin. And how can you not identify with that person? How can you not feel them when that happens? And so again, it's not the intention, it's not the end result, but somehow if I see the actor was giving that thing, to me this is the most immediate way to capture it. And so that's why we do them.
It also sort of seems to indicate that interiority that you spoke about. It's not just feeling, but
Exactly.
consciousness.
Exactly.
One of the things your films do is that you give black people credit for thinking. So, there's a guy.
Daryl Pinckney said that. I agree. Daryl Pinckney said that. There's this woman in the middle right here.
Okay, then, sorry.
I'm sorry, bro.
Do we have enough time?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
just these two.
We'll come here and then we'll come here.
My question is about what you just said about the intent and the audience and kind of the universal versus specific. For me, this felt like a very, very black movie. And like when the credits were rolling and I was sobbing, it felt almost like painful to be there with so many white people watching it. And it feels like to me something that transmits rather than explains. So for your thinking and your intent, I know that you're an artist and you create the most beautiful, emotive art that you can, but do you ever think about that? Like,
You know, I don't think about it, and I'll try to reference Arthur Jaffa and explaining why I don't think about it. Because I think, and we're just having a very clearly transparent conversation right now. You know, I think when white people make their films, they don't think about us, and that's totally fine. Because when Stanley Kubrick made 2001, he was just making 2001. But if some kid in Harlem, in Liberty City, in Watts watches 2001, he's going to be transported in this way that he should be transported. Now, the problem is, some suburban kid in middle of nowhere Kansas, middle of nowhere Iowa, doesn't get the same opportunity to be transported into my life.
Yeah.
doesn't get the same opportunity to be transported into Chiron's life. But when we make these films, it's not about giving him the opportunity. It's not made for him, but it's there, and I have no problem with him coming into the auditorium, sitting down, and experiencing it the same way that you did. So it's not something I'm intellectually aiming for or geared towards, and I feel no kind of way about it. I think it's kind of awesome that the movie can exist on this plane of being, I think this one here is aggressively black, but doesn't mean you can't receive it if you're not black. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I always think of what Toni Morrison said, nobody asked Joyce to be universal when he was writing about Dublin. So I don't have to be universal writing about Lorraine, Ohio. But very particular stories.
I
were
love
when
doing
they
Q&As with this man.
became-
You preach, bro. You preach.
Retain their universality. This gentleman, sorry.
This film was gorgeous. Thank you so much for making it. I loved it. And I apologize for asking a question that I already know the answer to, but can you confirm that Regina King is the national fucking treasure?
That's an awesome last question. You know what I say about Regina? Regina is so gracious. You know, I think that in this film, I'll talk about Kiki in reference to Regina. Kiki had to learn so many things in the making of this film. And typically, when so much is at stake, the person who's taking up all the energy, who has to be taught, who has to be brought along slowly, everybody else starts to resent that person. But Regina was somebody who would go, let me take you by the hand, and let me help you through this, you know? And so, yeah, she is the national treasure. But I think it's not a treasure that's meant to be put on display. It's the treasure that goes around and tries to help everybody else learn how to be just like Mama Bear. Yeah, she was dope. Like, really, really cool lady. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry we don't get him for a seminar on Claire Denis or your films, your art does not have therapeutic value. It's not utilitarian. What it is really beautiful. And so that's what makes it available to many people to take from it what they